Welcome, friends, to another late-night edition of Crime Time with DutyRon and Ed Wallace. We are retired New York City police detectives, and if you like all things true crime-related from the police detective's perspective, consider hitting that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, so you'll get all things DutyRon and Ed Wallace when we go live or upload another video. Hey, tonight we are going to get into the Stephen Smith first examination. That's the autopsy that was conducted in 2015, but we're also going to talk about he was exhumed arguably Friday. We don't have 100% confirmation from the attorneys that represent Sandy Smith, but we pretty much know that sometime very soon this second autopsy is going to commence. So we have a great guest, Dr. Eric Eason. He is kind enough to join us. He's a forensic pathologist, a return guest here on Crime Time with DutyRon, and I'm excited to have him because he is going to walk us through what a forensic pathologist does when a body's exhumed, and what a pathologist does during the course of an autopsy if the person comes in and is, again, in this case, presumed to have either been shot or hit by a car or by blunt force trauma. So we're gonna get into it. So bear with me. I'm gonna play a small piece, and I want you to just take a listen to this. This is Eric Bland talking early on with a news reporter, and he is saying that what Sandy Smith wants is answers, and what he wants and what they want to accomplish is to get to the bottom of what really happened to Stephen Smith. And I think what's most important is not what our thoughts and feelings are, it's what really happened. And they are trying to get to the bottom of it with their forensic team. They have an anthropologist, a forensic pathologist, they have a crime scene expert, and several other experts who are working with Ronnie Richter and Eric Bland to get answers for Sandy Smith, and most importantly for the victim here, Stephen Smith, who no longer has a voice. So we're going to get into it without further ado. I'm going to play this piece, and we're going to come right back on with our special guest, and you're going to hear a lot of information, a lot of things, and I've asked him to speak with you guys in layman's terms so you understand the process. So here we go. I'm going to play this, and we'll be right back on. This is early on, and Eric Bland describes what they're trying to accomplish here.
And we're following up tonight. Attorneys saying investigators confirmed they're treating his death as a homicide. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division says they took over the case in 2021 when they received new information. And Highway Patrol indicated they did not believe Stephen Smith died in a hit-and-run crash. According to the Smith family attorney, Eric Bland, officials say that they were waiting until Alec Murdaugh's murder trial ended to make this announcement. They thought witnesses would not be as open about the case. So they say SLED has reportedly been dedicating more resources to Smith's case since the end of the trial. Smith was found dead on a rural road in Hampton County in 2015. Initially, authorities considered his death the result of a hit and run, but no arrests were ever made. Smith's mother, who you see in this photo with him, has continued to push for answers into what happened.
Now, we have been following this story very closely, and Fox Carolina's Grace Runkle, who was in Walterboro for the entire Murdaugh trial, goes in depth with Eric Bland, who's at home recovering from knee surgery.
What's next for the Smith case?
We're going to find out what was the cause of death. That's the first thing. Rescind those death certificates, get new ones issued, get a new coroner's report issued, a new autopsy report issued, and then our investigators are going to hit the ground running. And whatever they find, we're going to turn over to SLED, and hopefully, the dam will break. Somebody said something. One thing Chief Keel said is he believes that there's 4 or 5 people that they have targeted that they believe have information that will lead to possibly the killer of Stephen. And he said the reason that they waited as long as they did was because the Murdaughs had this kind of stranglehold on the community down there that people were afraid to talk. And he thinks now with the conviction that there is a high likelihood that people are less reticent to talk.
What do you want to tell those people?
I want to tell.
Isn't that sad that he had to make that statement that people are afraid to talk while convict Murdaugh was out. Why were they afraid? Because a lot of people drop that are around this family, and when they disagree with them. So this is telling right here. We're just back it up just a little bit and finish it up.
Innocent to talk.
What do you want to tell those people?
I want to tell them, come forward. Have the courage and the decency. If you know information, I really do believe that the time is right for someone to come forward and really give that golden piece of information, because people talk. And I think there's things on phones and there's things on computers. Stephen was dating some powerful people, from what I understand. And there would be communications between them, whether it would be via email or via text, something. And there was also something that was uncovered by SLED during the Murdaugh murder investigation, which caused them in July of 2021 to reopen Stephen's investigation.
And that's a big part of it right there. In 2021, in the process of investigating the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, they uncovered evidence. And that evidence, as investigators, as a retired detective, we don't have any knowledge of what that is. And that's going to come into play here, because whatever it is that they uncovered is substantial. It's substantial enough where they reclassified his case to a murder case. So it's telling. Hey, without further ado, I want to introduce my guest, Dr. Eric Eason. He is a forensic pathologist. He studied at Clemson University, the Medical University of South Carolina. He's conducted over 4,000 autopsies, and most of them are post-mortem examinations, and most of them were autopsies. That's a heck of a lot of autopsies. So he's got a great deal of experience, and he's also has experience in the process of what we see here with Stephen Smith. He was exhumed, and he has experience in that. So Eric, thank you so much. Can I call you Eric, or should I be calling you Doc?
Oh, Eric's fine.
We're friends now, I think. So
Right.
Thank you so much for taking out the time on a Sunday night. And I know that you and I have been talking by email and text messaging about this case. I was impressed with your communication with me, Eric, is because you right away, when I asked you if you would take a look at this, you right away said to me, send me what you have and send me the autopsy report. I wanted to just get your thoughts, because we'll go straight into the autopsy that's going to be conducted after his body was exhumed. But I wanted to ask you, what was your line of thinking with asking me for that? Because I want the audience to understand what you were looking at here, what I was asking you to do, and just so when you talk to them, they get a little bit of the knowledge that you have in regards to this case.
Yeah, so the first exhumation that I did was at the GBI back probably like 2005 or 2006, I think it was. And if someone has been autopsied and then buried and then later exhumed, you want to first look at the original autopsy report just to kind of see what was found originally. It's just a good place to start. And so that's what I wanted first. I didn't just want to jump into the findings from the second autopsy after the exhumation, because I wanted to see what the first autopsy found first.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I feel strongly that a lot of people who are following this case, Eric, they're listening to everything that the media is putting out, and that obviously Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, that's the attorneys from South Carolina, they're looking to get answers in this case. And,
right.
Nobody from their side, and I've been listening pretty strongly to their statements. None of them are saying, hey, we want to lynch people. We want people to go to jail. What they want is the truth. They want to find out what in fact happened on the night of July 8th of 2015. And that's a heck of a long time ago. That's 8 years, coming up on 8 years this July. And my thoughts is that my heart breaks for this mother. She had a 19-year-old son who was going to nursing school and wanted to be in the medical field. And one early overnight in July in 2015, someone finds him, a passerby at 4 o'clock in the morning, calls 911 and says, there's somebody laying in the road. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the, obstacles that the forensic pathologist, the anthropologist that this lawyer's team assembled? They have a crime scene expert. He was instrumental in giving his testimony in the Murdaugh case. They have put him on board, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on what are some of the things that they could be looking at here with bringing a body up from that's been interned for 8 years.
Well, they're probably going to look at what the original injuries were, and probably take secondary measurements on them. They're going to take a lot of photographs. Since the first autopsy was done, all of the internal organs are going to have been sectioned during that autopsy. And so what happens during an autopsy is the organs are all examined, they're sectioned, and then when the autopsy is over, they're placed into a red biohazard bag and then placed back into the body. And then during the embalming process, the entire body is embalmed, and then the organs inside the red bag are also injected with embalming fluid as well. So you're not going to have an intact brain to look at. You're not going to have intact liver. All the lungs are going to be sectioned. The heart's going to be totally sectioned. So they're not really going to have a lot to work with as far as the organs are concerned. Now they can take a look at the laceration that was found on the head and take other measurements of it. The skull fractures that were found, those can be looked at again. But as far as like internal examination, that's already been done.
Right. And that's what they're going to be looking back at. Like you said, they're going to use that as a reference. But my thing is that, a lot of true crime enthusiasts and a lot of people who are following this case, their argument and some of the things that have gotten a lot of people upset is that originally they, from the scene, the highway patrol and the local police that responded, and highway patrol, and they were like, hey, this was not somebody that was hit by a car. They initially said it was gunshot wound. I showed those. I shared with you the autopsy photo, the crime scene photos. I'm getting ahead of myself because I got the autopsy report up on my screen. I shared with you all of those crime scene photos, and they're pretty gruesome to somebody who hasn't been in the industry or in the field. But for myself and for you, this is pretty everyday. And I'm saying it to put this on a lower level, but I think the officers that responded, especially the highway patrol and so forth, they looked at him when he was laying in the road, and the amount of blood and the way the blood was pooling towards the shoulder of the highway. He was in the middle. I think that's what led them. And I'm just trying to think of how I would have been reacting if I had the same situation. I think that they initially said, oh, he must have been shot, because did you see how the blood and everything was pooled all to, like, I don't know if it was the right or left side, but can you talk a little bit about that? Like, would that be indicative of gunshot wound to see everything that kind of just splattered towards one particular side? You know that photo that I'm talking about, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's more like a blood spatter type thing.
Right. I used the word spatter.
Not an expert.
Not right. But
yeah, I'm not an expert in that, of course. So I think they just saw severe head trauma and just figured this has got to be a gunshot wound, and that was kind of their first idea. And when the body arrives to the USC, who did the autopsy, during the autopsy is when they found something else to kind of indicate it wasn't a gunshot wound. Probably X-rays would be the first indication. There's no bullet found in the head, and then during the exam, the wounds on his scalp were not consistent with gunshot wounds, so that was ruled out kind of pretty quickly. I did notice that in one of the notes, it was still in September, that they were still thinking that it was a gunshot wound, which I thought was a bit odd. But we can talk about that later, of course.
Yeah. Right. And we're going to go into page 1 of 4 of the autopsy report. We're going to, again, folks, just hang around to the end of this show, because at the end, I believe, and I hadn't even speak to you about this, Eric, but I'm sure that you won't have any objections to it. I have 20 questions that my audience sent in to me, and actually Sleuthie Goosey, who's one of the Twitter internet sleuths she's out there and she's in the chat. I asked her to pool all of the true crime folks who are following this case, and in addition to Crime Time with DutyRon subscribers, she pooled her her folks who are following this case, and she sent me a complete a complete document, a Google Doc of all the questions. So at the end of the show, we're going to go through this line by line. There she is. I'm going to highlight her. Sleuthie, thank you for sending the questions for the great doctor here. I know he's going to have no problems with talking about that. I want you quickly, if you don't mind, just again, I asked you this before, but I kind of cut you short a little bit. I wanted to get for the folks who are following this closely, again, compares to a regular autopsy that happens fresh from a scene, crime scene. Like we'll look back to July 8th of 2015. Stephen's body comes in. There's a forensic pathologist there. There's a technician there, according to the reports. That compares to 2023. We're talking about two completely different things, because you're not really looking at, like you said, organs already been examined and so forth. What are they looking for here? What would they be looking for in the secondary autopsy? And what answers could we get for the family?
Yeah. Well, I mean, after reviewing the first autopsy report, I'm not really sure what they're looking for. Now we'll get into that, when we go through the autopsy report. They may just be looking for additional information to try and support that the case is more likely a homicide, I suppose, or that he was not hit by a car. That's the one thing I'm guessing. I don't think they're trying to prove that it was actually a gunshot wound.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like that's what's going on.
And this is something I got to ask you, and we spoke just very briefly about this before we went live. I have to, and I got to put this out there, and I think people in the chat will appreciate this. Is it common practice for a pathologist, a forensic pathologist that is employed by MUSC or any other hospital for that matter, to try to fudge an autopsy? Does that happen in America, or is
no?
I just have to ask you, because that conversation, I have seen it on many streets, and there's many people that are talking that this pathologist that conducted this exam fudged this for some reason or another.
No.
Can you talk on that?
I mean, specifically for this case, no, because Dr. Presnell was the one that did the autopsy, and she was one of my mentors at MUSC when I was there. Actually, my first forensic autopsy that I conducted was with her supervising me. I think it was a gunshot wound. So I've known her since 1999. She knows what she's doing. She's got integrity. Mm-hmm. There's no way she's going to make stuff up to try and suit somebody else. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, listen, I apologize for putting you on the spot there, because this is some of the questions, and this is some of the conversations that I am watching and hearing happening. And I know, like, from at least from my law enforcement career, most men and women, especially when I dealt with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, once we put a case over and it went to the medical examiner's office, we really, even as detectives, we definitely were there to, if you were the first detective on the scene and it was your case, you definitely would go for the autopsy. The first officer on the scene would go and do the ID of the body and make it official. So there was communication with the professionals at the medical examiner's office. But it wasn't like where we were stepping on each other's toes and saying, hey, don't you think that this was this? It was just professionally we would talk, hey, this position, because, Barbara Butcher, who is a legal medical death investigator, she worked closely with my partner, Ed Wallace, who you haven't gotten a chance to meet yet, but he's a great forensic investigator. And they talked on the last live when we got together and talking about this case. They said, we try to work together. And,
right.
The trades don't sway each other on, like, in other words, a pathologist is not going to tell a detective how to interview and interrogate somebody,
Right.
So again, this is a case that's very emotionally charged. And Eric Bland said right in that video that I played of him, they want the answers. And if wherever this takes them is where it's going to go, it's not like they're trying to create something, but they want to find out what the heck happened to Stephen Smith.
Right.
Did somebody, hit him over the head with a baseball bat and dump him in the road there? but it just seems very odd to me and off-putting, because I've been on the scenes of many pedestrian versus vehicle scenes, and most of the time they're not pretty. But again, I haven't been to dozens and dozens of them, but I've been to many. I've been to quite a few,
Right.
and one of them I described today. The remains were scattered over like a quarter of a mile,
Right.
but they were hit by a van. But so let's talk a little bit about the original report, and I'll put that on the screen if you don't mind. I'd like to get into it with you. Okay, so this is from this is page 104. Are you ready to do this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just find it. Hold on a second. Remove. All right. Share screen. There we go. And again, hold your questions to the end, because at the end we're gonna get into some questions.
All
So,
right, so you got the heading at the top. It occurred at MUSC, Medical University, South Carolina, the pathology department. They're located on Ashley Avenue. You have the heading, the autopsy final report. You got the case number. It's case number 15-436. That was their 436th case in the year 2015. Autopsy occurred on July 8th of 2015. Just some information, what county the case came from. So the death occurred in Hampton County, and the body was sent to MUSC for the autopsy. You had the attending pathologist, Dr. Presnell, who I mentioned, who actually did the autopsy. You have the coroner who authorized the autopsy. You have the autopsy technician, Raymond Edwards, who actually helps with the autopsy. And then the way the MUSC reports are set up are a little bit different than the way it was when I was in Chicago and I think in Georgia. So they put the summary on the first page. And so if you just want to scroll down a little bit, so the diagnosis after the autopsy was done, you have what's called a brainstem rent, or a stretch with associated parenchymal hemorrhages. That's basically, there's a tear in the brainstem. That's very bad. So where the lower part of the brain connects to the brainstem, the medulla, it was torn, and it's known as a rent. And the parenchymal hemorrhages are just some bleeding in the tissue associated with that tear.
and is that stretch, Eric, commonly seen, or is this something that's indicative of something that would be blunt force trauma or major trauma to the head?
This is blunt force trauma for
Okay.
sure, and this is highly specific for car crashes. Whether you are a driver in a vehicle or on a motorcycle, but more specifically, this is going to be seen a lot in individuals who are hit, like pedestrians struck by a vehicle. Okay, this is very specific for it. You can't get this from falling down the staircase. You can't get this from being hit in the head one time with a blunt object. This requires you to be hit with a very high speed with a heavy object, such as a vehicle or like a train or something like that.
Yes.
Cerebral contusion, that's just a bruise on the brain. That's another example of blunt force trauma. You have extensive skull fractures, which that's blunt force trauma as well. Scalp and subgaleal hemorrhage, so there's bleeding into the scalp and the tissue under the scalp due to being hit by a solid object, a blunt object.
Hey,
Can
I just stop you just for a second? I know we're trying to get through this. The extensive skull fractures. Now, would there be in another report where it would give details?
Yes.
This is saying extensive skull fractures.
Yes.
Will it go into it later on in this report?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, page 2. Yeah, this is just a summary right here.
Great.
Right forehead laceration, if that's a tear in the scalp and in the forehead, the skin of the forehead due to blunt force trauma. You have abrasions, which are scratches, and contusions, which are bruising on the right and left arms. The right shoulder was dislocated. You've got blood in the airways. That was due to the fractures at the base of the skull. This is how that happened, and the blood kind of got aspirated into the airways. And then she mentioned some pertinent negatives. Head x-rays, no projectiles. So they x-rayed the body to check for a gunshot wound, and they found no bullets in the head. It doesn't mean it wasn't a gunshot wound, but it indicates that there was no projectile in the head, because you can have an entrance wound and an exit wound, no projectile in the head, but you're going to x-ray the body in a case like this just to see if somebody was shot, and there was no evidence that shooting occurred. Gallbladder cholesterolosis, that's just a natural disease process found at autopsy and incidental finding. And then they ran toxicology testing, and he was negative. He wasn't drinking anything, wasn't on any drugs or anything like that.
I want to. I want to ask you something too. There's a lot of conversation about a rape kit that was done here, and then they somehow lost it, according to conversation. Would there be, is that part of a regular autopsy in a case like this? Would you normally do a sexual assault kit on a case like this?
Someone found dead in the street, yes, because it could have been a rape and a assault. And so you'd want to collect evidence to try and check for that. Anytime you suspect a homicide, you're going to go ahead and just collect the sexual assault kit. And then if you don't need it, it's okay. You know, better to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it type thing.
I'm going to put us back on here for a second, because I got to ask you this. Okay. So in that overview, you went over all of the line items, right?
Right.
Listen, in anything in life, right? People can make mistakes. What is the odds or chances that there could have been a mistake in? And I'm not saying there was a mistake in this, but what are the odds on an examination like this that the pathologist could have gotten it wrong? Just curious. This is just
an experienced pathologist would not get this wrong. And like I said, Dr. Presnell has a lot of experience. She has more experience than I do. So
she's still on the job.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't checked into any of that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just curious. I wanted to ask that because, we're all human beings, and I'm thinking about this second autopsy and the team now. They're hiring their own people. Are they, could they go in there and say, oh, well, wait a minute, it looks like he was shot, and how would they be able to? It would be obvious evidence of that, right? If that, in fact, was something that they discovered on second autopsy.
I don't know what they would find that would indicate that. I mean, there were no round holes in the scalp that would indicate an entrance gunshot wound, and entrance gunshot wounds tend to be round holes unless the bullet passes through something else to get there.
I'm just trying to understand it. I don't know anything about this stuff. So, all right, let me put it back on and let's move to. Let me get this.
So we're still kind of in the summary. If you scroll down, and so the official cause of death, if you scroll down further.
Hold on, I want to get it so we're not blocking it. Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right.
So you have cause of death. This is what goes on the death certificate. Blunt head trauma due to motor vehicle crash, pedestrian versus vehicle. So it was Dr. Presnell's opinion that he died from the blunt head trauma described above, and it was due to a vehicle striking a pedestrian as part of a motor vehicle crash. That was her opinion.
Okay. And
the manner of death undetermined. Okay, that's key here, because most pedestrians struck by vehicles are going to be witnessed. In a case where it's not witnessed and it's believed that a pedestrian was struck by a vehicle, the manner is probably going to be undetermined because we can't prove whether or not it was intentional. So what if somebody was running him down? And in a case like that, that would actually be a homicide. But if this were witnessed and it did happen in the way that we think it happened, then the manner of death probably would have been an accident.
So for the folks that are watching, the reason in 2021 is unknown why SLED reclassified this as and opened this case. They actually didn't reclassify it. And Ed Wallace, my co-host, when he was on with us 10 days ago, he said that actually SLED can't reclassify it as a homicide. That would have to come from the medical examiner.
The coroner,
right. In conferring with the medical examiner, right? Or whoever did this autopsy, right? Okay. So what I wanted to get out to for the audience as well is this could be a homicide by vehicular strike, intentional, but we don't know this. We don't know what SLED has and what they found, and that's the reason why everyone's going nuts with this, is because they're saying, well, he was killed somewhere else. I don't argue that. I'm not, there's no way that I feel like that he was struck right there in that road and fell the way he fell in the positioning. But I'm not a professional. I don't know about this stuff. But I agree that, it seems really odd and off-putting. And we're going to talk in a little bit about the shoes still being on his feet. We're going to talk about his clothing and the road rash. The limited amount of road rash on his body and so forth. But let's continue on with this so we can get through it.
So usually we'll put a comment or an opinion at the end of the autopsy report. So according to the coroner, the decedent was a 19-year-old male who's reported to be lying on the road by a passerby driving a wrecker at 4 a.m. on July 8th, 2015. Authorities responded, deceased at the scene. His car was 2 to 3 miles down the road out of gas. He appeared to be heading to his home. And then please see the coroner's report for additional details. So all that information that you see from the case history, that comes from the coroner. The coroner is the one that will investigate the death and report to the forensic pathologist. And so she just probably just copied and pasted from the coroner's report in there. She just put that information in there just to kind of explain why she came up with the cause of death and the manner of death that she did.
Okay.
So
And
that's page one.
This is all standard on all of the autopsies that are conducted here at this university.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
All right. So let's get to the final page here. Well, no, this
Well,
is
it's page two. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So the first part of an autopsy is the external exam. That's where you do height and weight, eye color, hair color. You look for tattoos. You describe any clothing on the body. So it was in khaki shorts, had a black sneaker on the left foot, matching right sneaker accompanies the body. I don't know why they took the shoe off, because he was apparently found with both shoes on. Black Nike t-shirt, bags were around the hands. That's to preserve any evidence. And so, it came in as a possible gunshot wound case. And so SLED's going to collect gunshot residue testing, which is not really used that much anymore, but they collected it anyway. It's really to see if he fired a weapon. I don't know what the results of that were. Then described some of the postmortem changes. So the body was still warm. Rigor was 3 out of 4, so it looks like he was starting to get pretty stiff. Lividity was unfixed, so that means
When they say the body, Eric, I'm sorry to interrupt you. When it says the body was warm to the touch, okay, so the passerby saw him in the road somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, I believe. And now, do we have a time on this when this is done?
Started at 12:30.
So a body will, I guess, depending on where it's being stored.
It's also in July.
Yeah.
Also in July.
Right.
in
July,
South Carolina.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, there you go. Okay.
I'm pretty sure it would have been hot.
Thanks for putting me in my place there. Okay. All right. Go.
Yeah, so he had lividity, so that's postmortem settling of the blood. So they start doing descriptions of him. So it was blonde hair, 5.5 inches in length, blue eyes. Let's see. Everything on the external exam looked otherwise normal, looked like a normal 19-year-old. Let's see.
I want to make it full screen.
Right. Had a scar on his left knee. And so then you get into evidence of injury, which is, this is the important stuff for this autopsy. So you got a 7.25-inch laceration, which is a tear in the skin, which extends across the superior mid to right lateral forehead. So it's on the top of his right forehead, involving the right eyebrow. Posterior undermining is marked. So it just means that the blunt trauma was going from front to back. He had bilateral periorbital hematoma, so he had 2 black eyes, essentially. That's going to be caused by base of skull fractures, which we'll get into. So when they looked at the head, they started reflecting the scalp, and you had bleeding on the scalp, pretty much all over, mainly on the it was bilateral. Scalp and subgaleal hemorrhages, so the blood extended below the scalp. You have a fracture that extended along the right frontal bone and the orbital bone. That's the bone that holds the eyeball. The right temporal bone, that's where your temple is, into the posterior aspect of the occipital bone. That's the bone in the back of the skull. Patchy subarachnoid hemorrhage, that's bleeding on top of the brain, over the right cerebrum and the base of the cerebrum. You have cerebral contusions, so those are bruises on the right temporal lobes. That's blunt trauma to the right temporal lobe. And then you have the brainstem shows stretching at the midbrain pons junction. That's the rent that we were talking about. It's called a pontomedullary rent, if everybody wants to Google that, with associated parenchymal hemorrhages. And then you got basilar skull fractures. So the brain sits on top of the skull, the floor of the skull, and you have multiple skull fractures involving the base of the skull. And those are highly lethal due to blunt force trauma as well. So it included the cribriform and orbital plates. Those are the bones that form the base of the nose or the nasal cavity and the eyeballs. Other bones that involved fractures were the petrous ridges and the occipital bone. So this is severe blunt force trauma to the head is what this is.
Yeah, I wanted to bring us back on because I got a question for you. And I'm sorry that I keep doing this, but this is all, if we go past this, I'll forget about it. This sounds like to me, and again, I'm no professional when it comes to this, and that's the reason I have you here, is because I yield to the pros. And listen, we're here, and someone just said in the chat, this guy isn't unbiased. Yeah, we're giving you, he's reading this report and giving you his professional opinion on what we're looking at here. And now what I'm going to ask you, Doc, is this. I look and listen to you talk about all these injuries, and I say to myself, this sounds like someone that just got beat up by a baseball bat or hit multiple times with a piece of wood, or to have that many different injuries, and all of it's on the right and back side of the head. Like, just me as as just a person of, this is not my thing. It just makes me things that make you go, like, this is just from getting hit one time by a car passing by
at a high rate of speed.
At a high rate of speed. All right, let's move on.
Most consistent with.
Yeah, I had to ask.
Consistent with.
Right, I got you. All right, so and you know what, that's the narrative that's out there right now. That's what everybody's talking about. That this kid was beaten to death and dumped in the middle of that road. All right, let's talk about this right shoulder fracture here.
Just as it's dislocated.
Dislocation.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Let's see. Irregular contusion on the anterior right arm. 12 by 3 inch aggregate, pretty large aggregate of abrasions on the back of the right arm, and the contusion that's from the road, from landing on the roadway after being hit. You have contusions, bruising on the right and fifth fingers. That could either be hit by the vehicle or by hitting the ground. And then you have the irregular abrasions on the left forearm and hand. That's from hitting the ground as well. Everything is consistent with being hit by a vehicle.
Gotcha. This radiograph, this is an X-ray of his head to show no radio
opaque.
Okay. Projectile.
So X-rays don't pass through bullets, and so that's why you see them on an X-ray.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so this is just the imaging of the head, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. All right, and now evidence transfer.
All right, so Colleton County Deputy Coroner attended the autopsy. So the clothing is going to be submitted to a crime lab. In this case, to check for any debris that would indicate that a vehicle struck him. They're going to look for paint chips and other debris from the car. We're going to have a separate report describing that. The paper bags covering the hands, they're going to submit those as well, because there could be evidence that remains within the paper bags. And then the fingernail clippings, all that other stuff would be stuff from the sexual assault kit. And I think you said that was lost or something like that. I don't.
Yeah, that's the conversation out there, and that's what I'm hearing, is that they can no longer locate the stuff. And it brings me to another thing that I wanted to ask you about, is all of these samples that they're talking about, this evidence transfer, right? The paper bag, the Nike shirt, fingernail clippings, pulled scalp hair, oral. Is that all saved? Is that something that is saved for an?
They should still have it. They should still have it.
They should still have it, right? So the medical examiner's office, the ME who works in conjunction with the coroner, and vice versa, all of this stuff that was collected at this autopsy in 2015 is still there. It should still be there. Okay, all right.
Yep. Should be in the crime lab in Columbia, the state capital.
Okay, great. All right, let's get this back on. Body cavities.
Yeah, the rest of the report is really just the rest of the autopsy. And so it describes all the organs from head to toe. So you start with the head, you take a look at the brain, and other than the injuries, the brain was otherwise normal. No tumors, anything like that. We look at the neck organs, all that looked totally normal. The heart, normal weight. No evidence of any heart disease or congenital heart disease, anything like that. If you keep scrolling down,
Right.
which I think you'll go to page 3, which I think is our last page.
Yep.
Yeah. Lungs, same thing, normal weight. No pneumonia, no lung cancer. Liver, same thing. Liver was a normal weight. You have the cholesterolosis, which just means you have cholesterol deposits on the gallbladder. It really doesn't mean that much. Alimentary tract, that's going to be the esophagus, stomach. Looks like he had tan fluid and was chewing gum, apparently. Looks like he had his appendix. Pancreas is normal. The GU tract can be the kidneys. That's a normal weight. They looked otherwise normal. His bladder contained urine. That's probably one of the things they used to run toxicology testing. The spleen was normal. Pituitary, thyroid, adrenal glands, that's the endocrine system, that's all normal. Musculoskeletal system, other than the fractures, appeared normal. And then at the bottom is just kind of a case summary. And that's the end of the report. And so the second paragraph, so significant findings at autopsy, including a brainstem rent or stretch with the associated parenchymal hemorrhages, cerebral contusion, extensive skull fractures, scalp and subgaleal hemorrhage, right forehead laceration with posterior undermining, abrasions and contusions to the arms, right shoulder was dislocated, blood in the airways, x-rays showed no projectiles, and so they did a urine screen and the tox was negative. They ran further testing on the blood, which was negative. They even checked for blood ethanol, that was negative. So it was the opinion of the pathologist that the decedent died as a result of blunt head trauma sustained in a motor vehicle crash, in which the decedent was a pedestrian struck by a vehicle. Pending further investigation, the manner of death is best left undetermined. Totally agree, because this was unwitnessed. And as we said, this could have been intentional. Someone could have struck him with a car intentionally, and that would make it a homicide. But if it were witnessed, it probably would have gone accident.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Doc. Okay, so like you just said at the end there, you said a couple of really important things. And some people are saying in the chat that you talk too fast, but I don't think so. I'm a New Yorker. I hear what you're saying, but you could always slow it down and listen to it on the replay again. But everything that he's saying here is, somebody that's in a controlled lab, like a pathologist, an anthropologist, anybody from the trades are not out on the scene. Now, this pathologist didn't go out to the scene and do a check at the scene. The job was just to examine the body that was brought in from the field to her. So again, the investigators, the SLED, the highway patrol, and the local responding officers, a lot of everything that was set tone-wise from the beginning, that's who really sets the tone for the investigation. And in this statement right here, it says, in light of the historical information and the autopsy findings, it's in the opinion of the pathologist that the decedent died as a result of blood head trauma sustained in a motor vehicle crash. Now, this is what everyone's stuck on. Everyone feels that is hogwash. And hold on a second. Where am I going to get it? Here's the button. Hold your ears.
Oh, hell no.
That's what we're saying. That's what people are saying, that, oh, hell no, that's not what happened. But again, she was not out in the field. It's just based on the evidence that's pertaining to the body that's there, that's being examined. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. And the main thing is, the main reason she came up with her opinion is the Pontomedullary Rent. And we talked about that in the email. That is the key piece of information that tells me that he was struck by a vehicle. This is highly specific.
And what is
car crashes.
What is that? What you just said in layman's terms for the people? The
Pontomedullary Rent. It's the stretch of the brainstem.
That might sound like. Hold on.
What are you people on dope?
So that's Mr. Hand saying, "Oh, I don't understand. Can you explain what that is?"
Can I type it into the chat? Would that work? P-O-N-T-O.
I'll type it. I'll type it. P-O-N-T-O.
Medullary, M-E-D-U-L-L-A-R-Y. Pontomedullary, that's one word.
Right.
And then rent, R-E-N-T. If you Google that, it will take you to that article that I sent you. And this is highly specific for car crashes, especially pedestrians struck by a vehicle.
So there it is. I highlighted it in the chat. Everyone go and look it up. And listen, guys and girls in the chat, I really do appreciate and respect everybody's opinion on this. And this is not, again, I'm giving you what I feel is an important look from somebody who has nothing, Dr. Eric Eason has nothing to do with this case. He's just given his professional opinion on what this report shows. And I think that what we're going to find out is that just like Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter said, they need to go back from square one in the investigation and go from ground zero from the beginning. And actually, in some cases, I would argue that they should go back 6 months before this murder took place and look at every interaction that Stephen Smith had with everybody. And I think that we are going to hear that in 2021, when this case was reopened by SLED, that they came across some significant information that led them to reinvestigate this case. And what that could be could range from electronic evidence from the Murdaugh, somebody within that family or somebody that's associated with them, or it could be some physical evidence. So we don't know. And that's the whole thing. Doc, I know you have something else to add to it.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the crime lab results?
Yeah. Yes, I'm gonna pull that up. Just give me a second.
So I agree with Dr. Presnell's assessment of calling this a pedestrian versus vehicle crash, and based primarily on the Pontomedullary Rent and the base of skull fractures, and also the single laceration to the right side of the head. A single blow from a baseball bat is not going to do this. Okay, the bat's not heavy enough. It's got to be a heavy object going at a high rate of speed to do something like this. All right. But the other key here is that, I watched some of the videos. I think the attorney, they're saying there was no physical debris found at the scene. All right. They took his clothing to the crime lab. And if you pull up the report here, I think it's page 27 of that packet you sent me.
Yes. I'm just trying to get on to the right one. Okay. All right. Just give me 2 seconds. Keep talking, Doc.
Yeah. So the crime lab looked at his clothing. They did not find any paint chips on the clothing when they looked at it with the naked eye. They did find some debris and they weren't sure what it was. So they looked at it under the microscope and they found blue paint chips on his clothing. All right. How did they get there? Well, because he was hit by a car. And they did further analysis. Basically, Toyota made cars with that paint from like 1984 to 1988. And so it's my theory that he was struck by a blue Toyota. Here it is right here. He advised that around 10 1mm single layer blue paint chips were found on the body. It could have been from an industrial tool, a dumpster. Maybe there was a truck pulling a dumpster or something like that, and he was hit by the dumpster. But Toyota used this paint from 1982 to 1988. Who knows what other vehicles used this type of paint? But this stuff about there's no debris found at the scene. Well, the debris was on the clothing.
So this is the case from investigator J.D. James on 8/3 of 2015. So
right.
This is from the beginning. These notes, and
right.
This is all in the paper in the documentation.
Right.
So I want to circle back to you about the pedestrian hit by a vehicle concept of. How was Stephen Smith still in his shoes loosely tied? That's the thing that a lot of people are saying, wait a minute. If those were tied super, super tight, and laced up, then okay, we could see maybe they're still on. But his shoes were loosely put onto his feet. And I have the pictures. I'm not going to show any of the crime scene pictures here.
Right.
Respect for the family. But I wanted to get your thoughts and what you have seen in the past on vehicle versus pedestrian versus vehicle. And is this uncommon or is this common?
I've seen both. I mean, I've had cases where all the clothing was on, the shoes were on, and I've had cases where all the clothing was totally blown off of them. So I've seen both. So it really, it's not that big of a shock.
Right. And it also looked like his pants, those khaki pants and the Nike shirt, there was no rips. There was no scrapes on it. There was no scrapes on his legs. We got a full view of his legs. Would that be indicative of someone that was hit at a high rate of speed from a car or a farm truck or
It could be.
blue Toyota truck. And you know what? SLED would have to look into who owns the blue 1982 to 88. You know, and it's almost sounding like this Kohlberger thing when they said 2013 to 20 something white Hyundai Elantra. But
Back in 2015 too, so you'd have to go way back to those old records. So,
right,
yeah.
right. So it's an interesting thought. Hey, so no road rash. Glow is saying 37.
No, he had road rash. It was the abrasions on his forearm and his arms.
I did see that.
Yeah.
Nothing on his legs. His legs looked untouched.
Let's see. Right, I don't think he had anything on his legs.
Yeah, I didn't see anything.
Probably was a side swipe.
Right. Sleuthie's going crazy in the chat because again, most of the folks are feeling all the debris though. The clothes got it all and none on the ground. Again, folks, it is up to the investigators to look at this stuff, and this is all 8 years in the past. So this is some of the difficulties of actually coming up and coming down to some conclusions here of what actually happened on the night of July 8, 2015. We're now in 2023, so it's not as easy as saying, all right, let's take a walk back to the crime scene. We saw many videos of people, current day. The landscape is different. The roadway is different. The mom has the car, so that's a good thing. Supposedly the family has the car. I don't know if it's secured in a controlled environment or if it's left out somewhere. I don't know what the car will yield from that night. But if nobody touched it and it stayed in the same way it was the night of, that could be something that investigators could use as tools to look for forensic evidence. And we hope and pray that they, looked at that car for fingerprints, dusted it, and did the whole, the crime scene unit package that they would normally do. And if Ed Wallace was here, we'd have a field day with that. Here's a super chat coming in from Badger Mom. She says, could his head have been rammed hard into a fender of a vehicle or beaten against the car? I think that's
possibly. Yes.
Yeah, anything is possible here. Thank you for that super chat. So yeah, I mean, there's how many pages? There's 110 pages, and I think probably everybody here has probably looked at all these pages and read a lot of these things. But I want to go to some of the questions before we wrap up. So I wrote down a couple from some of my people that sent in questions on DutyRon.com. Here's one coming in from Tina. Tina asks, she says, why was a rape kit done, doctor? And why is it lost now or not available? I think he could probably answer the first part of that question and probably not the second part. Why was a rape kit done on Stephen Smith?
Well, the case came in as a suspected homicide. So you're going to do that on anyone found dead and you suspect that it's going to be a homicide. And like I said, it's best to collect the evidence, and then if you don't need it, then you just hold on to it. But it's best to have it than not collect it at all.
Right. And it's sort of like dotting your I's and crossing your T's. You want to check off all the boxes so you're not saying, well, oops, we should have did that.
Right.
Here's one from Carol W. And she says, what was the tox report on the first autopsy? And she might not be watching. This is a question that came into our website.
Right.
And how will this impact the investigation and autopsy today in the current day?
So the initial tox report was negative. They didn't find anything in the blood or in the urine. Now they probably aren't even going to run toxicology because you're going to have a lot of artifacts in there. So the embalming fluid is going to test positive for, I think, like antifreeze and methanol and all these other weird chemicals. And I don't even think they'll be able to collect vitreous because that would have been collected during the first autopsy.
And that's from the eyeballs, right? The fluids,
right?
From the eyes.
Yeah, there's not going to be any blood left, so I don't think they're going to run tox on the second autopsy.
Right. So it won't come into play in the second.
I don't think it will.
I just checked my website. There's a couple more questions. Tracy M sends in a question and says, Doctor, how soon could we hear anything from this second autopsy? How long could that take, perhaps?
Well, I mean, they're usually scheduled, so they're going to have to pick a date to actually do it. And I think the body's in New York City, so they'll just pick a date to do the autopsy. It should occur in one day. It shouldn't take more than 2 days to do it. And they'll have an initial, like a preliminary findings, and then they'll finally have the final report out within weeks or so.
Right. Thank you for that, Doctor. And that concludes the questions that I had, because there was some redundant ones that we already covered. But Team Brittany, who's a good friend of Crime Time with DutyRon, I see she's now a channel member. Thank you, Team Brittany, for this question. This is actually not a question, but she says, how can we as a community be of help to Sandy Smith, Stephen Smith's mom? We all would like to support her. Well, you know what? What you can do is just help and pray for her to get answers. Be positive, stay focused on his case, share her son's story out onto your social media platforms. And again, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. It's better to just be quiet and just support the family. I think that is the best course of action for anybody.
Yeah, keep in mind, whether this is a vehicular intentional homicide with the vehicle, or if it was a drunk driver, there's still somebody responsible for doing this, and that person needs to be found. Somebody was driving that vehicle back in 2015, and if that person is still alive, that person needs to come forward.
Yeah, and needs to face the music, because somebody's responsible for this kid's death. And let me just pull up the super chat. Southwest 4x4 Explorers says, "Hey, DutyRon, check my last super chat." She was yelling at me, but in a loving way. If Stephen was struck by a car, wouldn't organs in the trauma box, chest, abdomen, have shown damage? Could it have been a large truck and hit to the head by a side mirror?
That's what I think happened. I think it was a single strike to the head and to the right shoulder that got him. I don't think the car really came in much contact with the chest or the abdomen.
So it could possibly have been someone who intentionally mowed this kid down. He was 19 years old. I call him a kid. Let me ask you, Doc, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but like I feel like he didn't get hit right there, and it almost looked like his body was staged. Did you look at the pictures, the way he was laying right on the yellow line? His legs were kind of a little curled up a bit. His arms were out, and he was laying flat on his back, and all of the blood out to the right of him, I believe, if you're looking at it from above. I mean, I know that this would just, be you speculating and guessing, but it just doesn't seem like if he was hit that he would have just laid so peacefully right there like that. It just seems odd to me and off-putting. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? And you don't have.
I've seen it before.
Yeah,
I've seen it before. So.
Yeah, it's a tough pill for me to swallow. But I have 19 questions, Doc.
Wow.
I know your rate is high for overtime, but I think I can afford it. I'm going to try to look at some of these and I'll ask them if we answer them, and I'll skip over it. So this is from Sleuthie and her community. And Sleuthie, you're welcome. I shared the link with you. You're welcome to come up with us. But hold on. Before I do that, 616 said that she sent in a super chat for me to check it. I'm sorry that I missed some of these. Check my previous super chat, please. I'm going to scroll back. If it's there, I'll answer it. If it's not, I'll just ask you to type it back in the chat again. And thank you, Eric, for being so patient. This is a tough stream to do because there's so many different opinions on this. Yeah. And I want to try to check off all the boxes and ask all the questions that people want answered. And if you do have any questions, put hashtag doctor in the chat or hashtag DutyRon, and I'll try to pick them up. And the mods, if you see them, try to highlight them. 616, I'm sorry, I can't find it. Sugar. I mean, I scrolled back pretty far. Oh, wait, there it is. Oh, no, this isn't it. Sam Panther, thank you for the super chat. I seem to be blocked. Not sure why. First time. I don't think you're blocked because I don't think that would go through. But then again, maybe. I don't know. Nancy Furman, thank you for the super sticker. Now that I'm scrolling back, I'm going to get to everybody. Come on, where's 616? If you could just write your question in again, I'll pick it out and we'll ask the doctor. Shit, there's so much here. Sorry about that, guys. Southwest 4x4 is sneaking in, or does the Dr. Eric think it would be more likely a baseball bat hit to the head by a driving vehicle?
Less likely. The bat just isn't heavy enough to cause the type of injuries that are seen or that we saw here.
Right. Yeah. So you're on the higher probability side that it was a murder by motor vehicle.
Yes.
Okay.
Or I think his death was due to being hit by a motor vehicle. Now, whether it was an accident or intentional, like a homicide, that I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's my opinion that he died because he was hit by a vehicle.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you for that, Doc. All right. There's 616 love. And I'm sorry that I missed that, your super chat. At DutyRon, South Carolina law enforcement SLED has identified Patrick Wilson and Sean Connolly as persons of interest. Thoughts? They were persons of interest previously, and then it's kind of fizzled out when this case kind of, don't forget, from 2015 to 2021, this was just deemed an accident, right? So there wasn't much investigating going on until the Murdaugh case happened. So I don't really know what they have on them to make them persons of interest. And I hate that word, persons of interest. Either they're suspects or and I don't like that persons of interest word. Are these two suspects? I don't know enough about it. So it is what it is. Let's get into the questions from Sleuthie. If he got hit somehow just in the head by a car, perhaps even a side view mirror, how is it that none of his teeth were damaged or completely knocked out? And A, sub to this, how did his right ear not suffer any trauma? B, why is there no glass in his body or anywhere on the street or on the pavement or paint? Wow, that was a one-part question with an A and a B.
Well, there was paint. There was paint on the clothing that was found.
Right.
As far as the glass is concerned, maybe he just didn't hit a part of the vehicle that contained glass. We had a question about the ear. For whatever reason, it just did not come in contact with the ear. It looks like the vehicle came in contact with his forehead, so that's where the laceration was.
Right. Here's question number 2 of 19. How could he have possibly not been flung into the air before falling to the ground? A, he sustained no broken bones or bruises throughout his body and no trauma to his organs, no damage to the organs, shoes still on his feet, yet somehow one fell off during transport and accompanied the body to MUSC, no tears in his clothing. That's a lot of things.
He did have bruises on his body that we talked about. I mentioned the contusions on the forearms and on the shoulder, and then he did have the dislocated right shoulder as well.
Right. So there were some of those injuries, but again, I think we already answered the sneakers and
they probably took the shoe off to put a toe tag on his foot.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah,
that's probably why they took the shoe off.
Yeah. That could.
Yeah, we have that. Yeah, we would have that all the time in Chicago. Body would arrive and one shoe was off, the other one was not, and you got to put a toe tag somewhere. So you have to take the shoes and the socks off.
Right. I'm going to take that off screen because it's so small and I don't know how to get that larger on the screen. Question number 3, why is there no mention in the notes with regards to how his car was found? When they arrived on the scene, all we knew was that a boy was in the middle of the road, nothing to suggest his car was somewhere else or where it might have been. This wouldn't be anything for our forensic pathologist. But yeah, that's something that we would tackle with Ed Wallace, because Ed was supposed to be here tonight, but he had an emergency, not an emergency of anything that was bad, but his son bought a new house and there's some kind of problems with the structural of the new house that he bought. And Ed is almost like he's like an architect. So he knows everything about structural and foundations. And so he's messing around with a contractor now with his son. He just came back from outside the country. So last minute, he said, I need an excusal. So I approved his excusal. Let's move on to question number 4. Why were no footprints taken near the body or the car? Okay, this is again a crime scene. This wouldn't be for you. Let's move on to question number 5. She was just talking about shoe impressions in there. We'll answer that with Ed. Why would they not follow up with his boyfriend? Okay, this is all more questions. Let me just scan through this. This is all SLED stuff. Why was the body moved prior to SLED's arrival? I'm trying to just pick out ones that, okay, I'm already on question 10, so we're making progress here. Why is there no mention in the notes of the fact that there's one door handle missing? That's going to be investigatory. Deputy coroner. Okay. Why was Deputy Coroner Kelly Green fired shortly after this incident?
I have no idea.
The one who left MUSC with the rape kit that was never mentioned again by anyone. So I'm not following this closely. This is probably everything in the notes, maybe or maybe that's what's available out there. So I think we covered all of the questions related as it relates to the medical examiner's office. Yeah, I'm just looking at these questions. These are all I love this one. I'm going to read question 17 only because it involves a curse word. So, how did this case, DutyRon, how did this case get so fucked up? Whose job was it to get the correct people investigating this? Because it sounds like a clusterfuck. No one wanted to do it, and everyone just kept passing it off to the next person and the next person and the next person. So, yeah, I mean, this is some of the parts that make you just scratch your head and say, how does this happen? But, you know, I don't know. Are you born and raised in South Carolina, Eric?
Yes.
Is this good old boys? Is this when we hear that stuff? Is that something that's spoken about amongst the residents of South Carolina, where small pockets of these smaller communities have a hand in the pocket of maybe some of the local enforcements? Is that common? I mean, I know you're not involved with the law enforcement, but I figured I'd ask you that.
Yeah.
So you're saying yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sam Panther sends in a super chat and says, thank you. I Am Media is laughing that I read those bad words. I should have sleep, but I didn't. So Doc, what's our takeaway from this? You're basically, listen, I said to everybody earlier today when I did my preview, there may be a chance that, we may hear things tonight that we didn't necessarily want to hear, but I think that this is educating everybody in a sense of, okay, you're giving your professional perspective on this report that was done. Now, when the second report's done, independent pathologists and anthropologists could come up with something that will make us just jaw drop, right? That's a possibility. We hear of this famous forensic pathologist Baden, right? He has done so many high profile re-examinations of bodies and we can just go on and on about this. But at the end of the day, in this report, according to your professional opinion, all signs are pointing to a person struck by a vehicle, but we don't know exactly how this happened.
Right.
Could it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I took the case with an open mind. I mean, I did not have the original autopsy report until earlier this week, and when I first read it and when I saw the word Pontomedullary Rent, my first thought was, let me go look that up in all my forensic textbooks and go Google it and just see what it says. And pretty much every source I went to said these are highly specific for motor vehicle crashes. There's that article that I sent you, and lists a study that they did of individuals who died from it. And every single one of them was motor vehicle crash, pedestrian hit by vehicle. That's what I focused on. To me, that's the slam dunk in this case is that finding. If I did not have that Pontomedullary Rent, I may have gone elsewhere with this. But to me, that's highly specific for car crashes or hit by a train.
Right.
High speed crashes with a heavy object are what caused that, almost exclusively. And once I saw that, I pretty much, that was the answer for me right there.
Here's a comment coming in, Doc, from Biker Blonde. Sorry, I'm not seeing any complete explanations here for this conclusion. So maybe this person didn't watch from the beginning. Maybe go back and watch the replay. But what's your response to that?
I mean, I just explained it. It's the Pontomedullary Rent. I mean, that's the thing that nobody on this show knew about until I mentioned it.
I've never heard that mentioned in
Yeah.
any. I looked
Yeah.
for that in news reports, and nobody ever mentions it.
It's something that pretty much forensic pathologists, we know all about it. I've seen a couple of them in my career. They're in all the forensic textbooks, and like I said, they are highly specific for motor vehicle crashes, especially pedestrians hit by motor vehicles. And so that's my conclusion is based almost entirely on that.
Right.
You're not going to see that with a baseball bat to the head. I'm sorry, you're just not going to.
Right. And what would you see with a baseball bat to the head that would be different than what you see here?
I mean, a single blow isn't going to cause the rent, number one. A single blow will cause the laceration, but a single blow is not going to cause multiple base of skull fractures as well, and also multiple cerebral contusions. But a single blow from a heavy object at a high rate of speed will cause all that stuff.
Right. But again, people get caught up on the fact that there was not a lot of road rash, that he wasn't,
shoes were still on. None of that to me matters because of what was found during the autopsy.
Interesting. Hey, listen, if you want to continue this conversation, please consider subscribing to Crime Time with DutyRon, where you'll see professionals like Dr. Eric Eason and Barbara Butcher and Dr. Murray Marks, who is a forensic anthropologist. We covered this extensively from all the trades. Ed Wallace, a crime scene unit and forensic expert, he will be on to give his commentary as well. We covered every angle that we could speak about here as it pertains to the Stephen Smith case. And I encourage you guys to leave comments down below. Leave your comments on Facebook, because we're live streaming to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and I believe LinkedIn. So we're live streaming to 5 different platforms. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below for myself, Ed Wallace, or the doctor, and we'll be happy to get those questions answered as it pertains to this investigation when it comes to the forensic exam. Again, we're not going to speak or go out of our lanes and talk about, what the crime scene evidence is. That's not what this show was about. It's about the autopsy. So a lot of people are thanking you in the chat, and a lot of people are disagreeing with you. I know that.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, but listen, we're definitely I'm definitely much more educated. I've left this hour and 20 minutes or hour and 15 minutes a lot more educated when it comes to this stuff. So James M.D., who's over in the UK, says, much appreciated, Dr. Eason. And I don't know, James might be a medical doctor over there. So
or maybe his last name, I don't know.
Yeah, Nicole says great show. Sleuthie is saying autopsy question with her hand up. I gave her the link. You can come in with the link, or you can just type it in the chat. And then I'll look for your last question. Allison BD, that's a great friend of Crime Time with DutyRon. She says, we appreciate his time. Thank you. Jay Lamb says, hey, Doc, go get some sleep. Yeah, it is. Listen,
I had a nap earlier.
Yeah, he had a nap. He's good. He's just, maybe just had has a busy day ahead of him today. Tomorrow, I mean. So
tomorrow, I do.
Today was a light day. You said you watched a little bit of sports yesterday, right? We didn't do all
Final Four.
Final Four was happening.
And I was at the pool all day today, so that's why I'm a bit red.
Yeah, so there you go. He's got a little bit of a vitamin D exposure today. Heidi Cakes says, thank you so much, Dr. Eason. Thank you, Heidi.
Anytime. Hope I get to come back.
Yep.
Maybe we can discuss the exhumation autopsy report. That would be fun.
That would be interesting, and that will be something that we will definitely, if you're available, we'll do that. Erica is encouraging Sleuthie to jump on. I sent her the link, so give thumbs up when I can join. I'm giving you the thumbs up. So she said she can't wait to join, but that was at 9:00. Oh yeah, that's just a few minutes ago. So if she joins, we'll take some questions from her. She'll probably pepper you with a bunch of questions, but keep it autopsy related. I think she knows now. Those 20 questions, we were only able to answer 2 or 3 of them. The rest of them were investigative wise. But I did tell her that Ed Wallace was going to be on. So when with Ed here, he would have been able to handle some of those crime scene questions. Mike Jetson says, thank you, Doc, for your time. And James says, "Thank you, colleague." So maybe
Oh,
James
so he must be, yeah, he must be a forensic pathologist. Okay.
or a
Very nice.
doctor of some sort, right? James.
Yeah. Things
Uh,
are a bit different over there in the UK, though. I'd love to go
okay.
over there and spend like a couple months and just see how it works. I heard it's very different.
Annie says that she agrees with the doctor. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
A couple of super chats came
It's
in.
okay to disagree. I don't mind. I mean, I like the debate. But yeah, to me, it's like I said, it's the Pontomedullary Rent, and just based on education, training, and experience, that's highly specific for pedestrian hit by car. Checked all the textbooks. I Googled it, or I read that article. I don't know if you can post that article on here.
I will. I'll post it in the
yeah.
comment section. I'm not going to post
Yeah.
it here now,
Yeah.
but that was an informative article. Okay, Sleuthie's here. I would like to wrap this up by an hour and 30 minutes. We're at an hour and 15. So Sleuthie is here. Let's get her on when she gives the thumbs up. No, she said.
I don't know if the Toyota was the only matching paint option. I have no idea.
Okay. Sleuth, was that a thumbs up, Sleuth? I see she got a fancy new microphone too. I like it.
Yeah,
Hey.
I thought maybe I could like bring down the amount of times I blast people's eardrums out.
Well, thank you for creating the 19 questions. And again, I wasn't being smart. It was just that, you know, a lot of them weren't pertaining to his trade. So I wasn't going to pepper him with those, but I was ready to give it all to him, to give every question to him. So what do you got for us?
You didn't tell me Ed wasn't coming. So I basically, so I'm thinking about his eye. I know we briefly skimmed over it, but I'm just thinking about, so I get the whole hit really fast with something, but I guess his eye is so close, right, to his forehead, right? And he's got broken bones here in his temporal lobe. It is all, I mean, it caused a lot of damage on that side of the face. So he had 2 black eyes, and I guess I'm just curious how it didn't affect, like, so his corneas are clear, his conja's still clear. It seemingly didn't affect his eyeballs at all. And is that normal, would you say, if you're
That's
breaking temporal bones?
That is an excellent question. Okay. Yes. All right. So the black eyes were not due to him being struck in the face or hit in the eyeballs. Those were actually due to the base of skull fractures that he had. So what happens when a base of skull fracture occurs? Blood is going to leak through the base of the skull and end up in the eyeballs. So without any direct trauma to the eyes themselves. That's a common finding in individuals who have a base of skull fracture. And so actually, when you start an autopsy on someone and you find what we call raccoon eyes, that pretty much means they have a base of skull fracture, and that you're going to have to find that during the autopsy, usually like from a fall onto the back of the head. That'll cause it. Individuals who are shot in the head, the shock wave from the bullet can fracture the base of the skull, and the blood will seep into the tissue around the eyeballs. But it's not necessarily from a blow to the eyes, like from a punch or anything. But that is an excellent question.
So I'm just thinking the sheer force of something, the sheer force that it would take to put that laceration on his head, right? So can you just explain really quick, does a laceration mean that the edges were clean? So it was a clean cut wide open, or was it torn?
All right. Yeah, so a laceration and a cut are 2 different things. A cut is from a sharp object like a knife. A laceration is a tear in the skin or in the scalp. So you're correct about that. You're going to have tissue bridging across the laceration. Edges of the laceration are oftentimes abraded. That's usually true, like with a baseball bat, and we didn't see that. So all I saw here in the report is just a clean laceration, which did not imply to me that an object like a baseball bat was used. I did not see any abraded edges on it. How much force is it going to take? It really just depends on the individual. But being hit by a vehicle will cause a laceration like that, in addition to the rent and in addition to all the base of skull fractures. It would have been having to go at a high rate of speed and be very heavy at the same time.
So, and it broke, what it seemed to me was like it broke. So he had a skull fracture, but it was one that extended from one side to the other side. It wasn't like multiple different.
Correct. It was one fracture on the outside of the skull, or on the skull cap, that extended all the way around here. And then he had fractures on the inside of the skull. When you take the brain out and actually look into the base of the skull, there were multiple multiple fractures along there. That's what I'm getting from the autopsy report, at least. I can read it again.
From a
Yeah, fracture extends along the lateral right frontal bone, right temporal. So I have one single fracture on the outside of the skull and then multiple base of skull fractures on the inside. And that could all have been caused by one blow to the head from a heavy object traveling at a very high rate of speed. Yes.
Let me read this super chat, Sleuthie. Hold on a second. Was there any diffused? Can you?
Yeah, diffuse axonal injury. Right. You're going to see that. You have to have some survival time to see that. Number one, and number two, you have to do like microscopic examination to look for it. So in this, you're not going to see that too much. Now, did he actually have DAI? He probably did. It's just you're probably not going to be able to see it because he would have died very quickly.
Right. Thank you for answering that. And Don Hagerman says, DutyRon, I think everyone's getting confused with hit by a car to being clipped by a vehicle. Being clipped, he would not be hit by the mass of the vehicle and would explain these injuries. What do you think about that?
Side swipes can cause severe damage just as direct hits as well. Yeah, there are a lot of people that are just hit by the side mirror of a car and it'll cause severe damage. A lot of it is speed.
Right.
Speed is a big factor. So the vehicle is probably going very fast.
It's in my experience when someone gets hit directly from direct on hit from the front of a vehicle, it's an ugly, I mean, right. I've been to train accidents where people are hit by trains, but which is even worse. But a car at full force, 50, 60 miles an hour, right. hits somebody direct on, you got, just a nasty mess right. that could go a quarter of a mile. And I've witnessed that several times.
Yeah, I mean, force is mass times acceleration. So the mass would have been heavy, because the vehicle and the acceleration probably would have been going fast. So you take those two factors together, multiply them. That's a lot of force.
Yeah. Princess Michelle says Dr. Eason is very patient with us. Go ahead, Sleuthie. Go.
I'm just thinking. I'm picturing in my head. So if I'm walking, say I'm walking on the yellow line, which is essentially where I would have to be. And
are you in Chicago?
No, no. Oh. And I don't walk on the road. But anyway, well, and that's something that we brought up too. We were talking
the yellow
about
line of the road. Okay.
Yeah,
is about the yellow line.
We typically here, if we're on a 2-lane, we'll walk we'll walk on the side of the lane that the cars would be coming head on, so we can see them coming, as opposed to having them coming from behind us and not be able to see them. Because if they come around a curve, they're not going to see us, and we're not going to see them. This was like a straightaway, so I don't know if maybe he felt more comfortable being in there. I don't know. But I'm thinking if a car comes by and it clips me, I guess with the mirror, it clips me in the forehead is where it would have had to clip me. It's going to clip me. It's going to keep going. I can't see how it's not going to damage my ear as well as spin me entirely around in a circle. Like spin me completely around. The force of something hitting me on one side would not spin me completely around. And so, and before I worked in neurosurgery, I was in ophthalmology. And so the eye thing, I cannot understand how there would be no type of damage to his eye. Especially we're talking about like you, we're not talking about a slender back, right? We're talking about a thick mirror that would have very well straight up and down. It would have hit a good portion. I mean, it could have depended on where his head was turned, but I don't know how it wouldn't have broken his cheekbone, damaged the ear, and at least caused redness on his eye, on his eye. But like, so that's something that I wonder about. The other thing.
Yeah. Some things just can't be explained. I mean, it looks like it hit his right shoulder too, because that was dislocated. So I don't know if he was like hunched over and, hit the forehead and the shoulder at the same time. I'm not sure, but his right shoulder was also dislocated.
Yeah, I'll tell you what makes sense of that. And of course, they're not saying this, but I was just kind of looking at the sketches, the crime scene sketches and whatnot. And even the person that called 911 thought that it was an animal, like a deer at first.
4 o'clock.
Yeah. So my wondering was like the way he was positioned on the yellow line, was it possible? So his head, the right side of his head was on the yellow line and his right shoulder was on the yellow line. Is it possible someone thought he was a deer, was driving too close to the yellow line and clipped the whole side of his, his right side of his head and his right shoulder? Because his arms were spread out. Yet. Or maybe he was.
Yeah. I don't. There would probably be tire tracks on the body, and I don't think they found anything like that. It doesn't look like he was run over.
Right.
You usually
Right.
see tire tracks on the body when that happens, and that wasn't described. And his clothing would have been torn as well.
Yeah.
Sure. I have one more question and then I'll go, I
Sure.
promise. My final question, I was going through the notes and I know you guys aren't, so I won't go too much into it, but we were talking about like the pathologist lying, fudging, whatever you want to say. I don't necessarily think that's the case at all. But I'm just curious procedural wise, since you've done autopsies, right? Am I understanding that right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Over 4,000.
So you deal with coroners directly? Like
Yes.
local coroners? Okay.
I have. Yeah.
So in these notes, one of the investigators says that he called there and he spoke with her. And then also he spoke to the coroner himself, like I don't know, like a month after, or 8/18 it was. So a little
Mhm.
over a month after the autopsy was done. And at the end it says, well, in the middle it says the pathologist also states, well, we'll skip that. That's not important right this minute. But at the end it says the coroner stated that he had made contact with the pathologist, Dr. Presnell, and she stated that she would be willing to change her report to read however he wanted it. Is that normal
I'm
when
glad you
working with
brought
the
that up.
coroner?
I'm glad you
Yeah,
brought.
I think maybe they're talking about the way that the cause of death statement is worded. So,
Do you want me to read the thing? Would that help?
I mean, certain coroners like certain things to be. They like certain cause of death statements to sound the way they like it to sound. So maybe that's what they're referring to. It's like maybe Dr. Presnell wanted to sign the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries, and maybe he wanted to say, well, why don't we do blunt force trauma of the head due to motor vehicle crash, and maybe it was just a situation like that. I don't think that they're trying to say that she's going to make up injuries that weren't there or try and alter her interpretation of the injuries. I think it just sounds like the way things are going to be worded in the autopsy report so that he can put it on a death certificate and make the death certificate sound like he wants it to sound, because he's the one filling it out.
But
He's the one
definitely,
signing
Doc,
it.
that wording didn't sound right to me. Like when I read, I
I should
remember
have
reading it.
I should read like a couple sentences ahead. It might give a little context because they do discuss what it was talking about. I just didn't want to take up a whole lot of time. But
Right.
he said that the coroner called and he faxed me a copy of the report and told me he does not agree with the pathologist stating that the victim was struck by a motor vehicle. We discussed the
Okay.
fact that the report states death as blunt head trauma, motor vehicle crash, pedestrian versus vehicle. Then the manner of death was undetermined. I would think that the blunt force head trauma would be the cause of death, and the motor vehicle crash would be the manner the trauma was delivered to cause the death. The pathologist also states in the report that in light of historical information along with the autopsy, which you read at the bottom of that report, these conclusions were made. To what historical information she possessed, I am unaware. I attempted to speak with Dr. Presnell at an earlier date to go over information that had been discovered throughout the investigation, and that was ill-received. The coroner did tell me that the deputy coroner that had gone to MUSC the morning of the autopsy and spoke with the pathologist, she has since been fired from his office. I spoke with the deputy coroner Green and Agent Burke with SLED, as both of them were present at the time of the autopsy. Both stated they made no reference to the pathologist about the victim being struck by a vehicle, only that he was found in the road. The coroner stated that he had made contact with the pathologist, Dr. Presnell, and she stated that she would be willing to change her report to read however he wanted it. Does that change anything that
I have
remember?
no idea. That whole sequence of conversations sounds like a total mess to me.
Yeah, and that's in the
The whole
report.
thing is a mess.
Yeah, the whole
But
thing.
that's the investigation. That's the only thing I'm going off of is the 100
Right.
and some odd pages, and I have my own that's $500, but we'll get a ball here soon. So, but
Right.
that's what it said, and he was basically making it because we leave out things we don't think is important, and
Right.
sometimes not even on
Well,
purpose.
keep in mind,
Mike,
the case started out as a gunshot wound homicide, and I saw notes in there where the police seemed disappointed that it wasn't a gunshot wound, and they were shocked that it was going to be considered a pedestrian versus motor vehicle crash. It's almost like they were disappointed. I don't know if they were upset that they got it wrong on the first day, or
I think they knew that it was going to cause a lot of issues because essentially they had if you're thinking about like chain of custody with all the evidence that was collected
Mhm.
and how people were going about protocols, I mean, you had people come on scene. They said, and the coroner said that it was a gunshot wound. So they of course called in the people that investigate those crimes,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then so the people that investigate car crashes, they didn't go to the autopsy. They were told not to.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
when they came back and said it's an autopsy or it's a motor vehicle accident, they're like, well, the chain of custody on his clothes has been broken for hours upon hours. They had to rush down there to go get them from the coroner
Mhm.
or
Hmm.
from the funeral home. So I think it was more or less like a how were we all on the same page for 24 hours and now we're not and
Right.
things have been ruined investigative wise.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I
Good
just didn't know if that
points.
was
Yeah.
normal.
It's all, everything about this case is not normal. The back and forth conversation with investigators and the coroner and the medical examiner's office. For me, it's not something that we commonly come across, and that's what's making this so. It's making everybody crazy that's watching it, because we don't know who to trust because of these silly conversations that are going on. And Don, thank you for that message. DutyRon, do you think there would be any evidence left in the vehicle? It all depends where that vehicle was stored, how it was stored, how many people were messing with it, who went in it, because now you're talking about 8 years of
Right.
we don't know where that vehicle was. So if it was put inside a garage in a controlled environment, then it would be, maybe there'll be some evidence there. But if multiple people were futzing with it, so the evidence will be degraded.
Yeah, his sister, they did give it back to them early, way early on. So they had been driving it. Probably doesn't even run anymore. It had that old leak.
There you go. Sleuthie, I want to
No
thank you for all the work that you do and everything that you do on Twitter. If you guys are not familiar with her, I think everybody here is familiar with you. But for people who watch the replay, go over to Twitter and follow Sleuthie at Sleuthie Goosey. I'll link it in the description here if that's all right with you, Sleuth.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And thank you. And thank you, doctor. I hope you didn't. I'm a particular way. It's not just you. And I'm sorry. Ed was going to get the
No,
peppering
that's
too
okay.
today. Thank
It's
you
all
guys.
right.
I'll go.
He's good.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Sleuth. All right, there she goes. Thank you for joining. Doc, I want to thank you for taking an hour and 32 minutes of your time. You are awesome. And once this second autopsy is complete, would you promise to come back and
Yes.
we'll continue this conversation? In the meantime, everybody, please leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of my guest, and now my guests, plural, because Sleuthie is considered a guest. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of this conversation. Dr. Eric Eason, thank you so much for being here. And as I always say to everybody who's here in the chat, we need to get around Sandy Smith and support her. We need to send strength, prayers, and positive vibes to Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, the attorneys that are working hard to find out what happened to Stephen Smith. And anybody and everyone who has information that no longer is afraid of this Murdaugh family, because convict Murdaugh is in a state lockup. So he is behind bars. And I'm hoping that people will come forward. People need to talk. People need to come up and step up. If there's information, let the investigators know. Again, I want to thank you all for the super chats. Catherine Joy, thank you for that $50 super sticker. Much appreciated. Thank you. And listen, here, there's people in the chat saying, come back, doctor, when we get the second autopsy.
I will.
Yeah.
I certainly will.
Jesse Lynn, thank you for being here. The mods, thank you for being here. And replay viewers, we appreciate you. All right. On behalf of Crime Time with DutyRon and Dr. Eric Eason, we're going to wish you guys a good evening. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace and love from Crime Time with DutyRon, from New York to South Carolina. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.